This week in the Triangle. My name is Stephen Horn, and this is where I talk about some stories that have happened over the past week in the Triangle area of North Carolina. And this week we have some stories related to local government, some stories related to crime, and some stories related to both. So starting off, we have the Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools. As we have covered in previous weeks, the Chapel Hill City Schools Board of Education chair, so this is the chair of the Board of Education for the district, George Griffin, he had made comments both publicly on the board and more recently in and I guess a town hall or some sort of election event ahead of this previous election about how their school board had basically defied the Parents' Bill of Rights enacted by the GOP controlled legislature and had basically said, hey, we're not going to enforce two elements of this law. And those two items were requiring parental notification for name or pronoun changes for students and also refusing to prohibit sex and gender identity instruction for K through 4 students. So this caught the eye of the legislature, specifically the North Carolina House Oversight Committee. And so last week they were dragged in front of it to answer, hey, are you in compliance with the law? Because there's also, it's a very woke district, perhaps one of the wokest school districts in the entire state based on the population, based on the demographics. This is, Chapel Hill, one of the bluest cities in one of the bluest counties. And so when they came before the board, they said, actually, we are 100% in compliance. We are 100% in compliance, is what they said. Now, one of our legislators from Wake County, the Republican Mike Sheetselt, said, it is offensive for someone to come before this body and say we are complying with this law when there are videos, there are documents, there is a mountain of evidence that you are not. And yes, there is a mountain of evidence. They even had an email from George Griffin, the board chair, saying, the Parents' Bill of Rights contains a number of provisions that were adopted by the board with two exceptions, laying out those two exceptions. And so the answer from the superintendent and from the chair was basically, well, as the board, we only implemented 10 out of the 12 policies. The other two were implemented by district policy, by staff guidance. So, this is the staff guidance that they pointed to. If a student informs an employee that they would like to be called by a different name or pronoun by school staff, a school employee should have the following guided conversation with the student. Staff may wish to include a school counselor or administrator in this conversation. And then this is emphasis from the original text. There is a law in our state that requires that I notify your parents before making this change. Have you already talked to your parents or guardians about this? Do you have any concerns about my notifying them? Tell me about your concerns. So that's what they're saying. Hey, it's not a board policy, but in our district, we are following this policy. But the Republicans on the committee did not seem convinced that the district is actually in compliance with the law. So Representative Jeff McNeely from Iredell said there's a darn good chance you may not get state funds. Basically, if the district did not convince them that they were in compliance with the law, because this is the enforcement power that the state legislature has. I don't believe the Parents' Bill of Rights has any criminal consequences for school administrators who refuse to follow it. But if they if they anger the state legislature, then the state legislature could choose to withhold funding because a significant amount of the funding for each school district in North Carolina comes from the state. There's the portion that comes from the county, usually property taxes. There's a portion that comes from the federal government, and there's a portion that comes from the state. So the state legislature passes the budget. I suppose if they wanted to, they could single out a specific district and say, nope, no state funds for you. And I'm sure the district would like to avoid this, but more directly, they answer to their citizens. And it seems like Generally, the citizens of the Chapel Carborough City Schools are probably behind this. They want this. They vote Democrat by, I believe it's an 80 to 90%. Um, Not a margin, but 80 to 90% of the citizens in that district vote for Democrats. So, it might not be in line with the GOP controlled legislature, but it is likely in line with their constituents. So we will see how that develops, because I could see it going either way. I could see them making an effort to convince the legislature, um, or I could see them throwing up their hands and trying to use it as a wedge issue if the legislature goes through with it. Basically daring them to say, "Hey, are you actually going to withhold funds?" Because it's not like the citizens of this district don't pay the income tax that funds those the state budget. So I can imagine that that would be an issue that would resonate with a lot of Democratic voters if they say, "Hey, you can still pay your income tax and then your schools aren't funded." Currently they're using the lack of the budget passed by Republicans against them to say, "Hey, you should be in Raleigh passing a budget." So we'll see how that plays out. And our next story here is from Cary. So if anyone's local and has been following the Cary news, you'll know that there is a big kerfluffle over some financial payments, and the town manager has been suspended, put on paid administrative leave, but they have not been able to say why. Not for a lack of desire, but because apparently the state law regarding state employees doesn't let them. At least that is what the mayor said, if we're to believe the mayor of Cary, Harold Weinbrecht. So what's happened so far as I can piece it together, is that on November 21st, the town confirmed that Sean Stegel, the town manager, had been placed on leave after a closed session. So basically, if you go to a board meeting, they can go into closed sessions to discuss employees, basically personal employee details that, under state law that is not open to the public. And a few days later, on December 5th, the News and Observer revealed that the town had given $37,397, $37,397 to reimburse one of the town's council members, Lori Bush, for tuition for a master's degree. And that email showed that it was Stegel who suggested that Bush and he do the program together. And apparently, I believe the mayor and other members of the council didn't know about this until there was some sort of public records request. I guess that it's not really clear who made the public records request. I don't believe, or why the mayor was looking at public records requests, or what. But basically the mayor and some of the other members become aware of this. The public becomes aware of this, and she gives back the money. But these emails also disclose some other questionable expenses, including thousands of dollars for luxury hotels, including one conference that I believe 7 town employees went to, and Stegel booked himself at a luxury hotel, different than where the rest of the employees were staying. So it's not clear if any of those were related to why he is on paid leave, or if it's something else entirely. But apparently the state auditor has gotten enough complaints that he is doing a probe of the policies of he's doing a probe of the town of Cary's policy to determine if an actual audit is necessary. But from what the mayor has said, it seems like it is kind of the town that is driving some of this transparency to the limit that they can. So who knows? Who knows? Who knows if we will be told what is actually going on? Who knows if they will get things into line? I believe that the citizens of Cary certainly hope so. And our next story here is out of Durham, and this is an interesting story, because I have no idea how true it is, but it is out there. What we know is true is that the chief district court judge of Durham County has been arrested and charged with domestic violence. So he's been charged with 2 misdemeanors for assault on a female and misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. This case was moved to Guilford County to be out of, his own court system that he is the top judge in. So basically, he's accused of grabbing this woman's neck in an incident at a mechanic shop on November 29th. And the language in some of these charging documents or other court documents doesn't really seem to be clear whether she was his girlfriend or his ex-girlfriend at the time. And so Jones' lawyers deny the allegations. They don't just deny it, they say there is a witness that witnessed the encounter, a neutral, unbiased witness, a service professional who witnessed the encounter and says no assault occurred. So was this assault or was this woman making things up? So 2 days after the incident, the woman filed for a temporary protection order. So the criminal charges say that at the time the defendant was formerly in a recent dating relationship with the victim, implying that they were no longer in a dating relationship when they broke or when the alleged assault occurred. But the story is that they drove to this mechanic shop together to get the woman's brake fixed. So if they had broken up, why are they still driving places together? I don't know. And so the woman claims that she and Clayton Jones, this judge, were arguing about getting her brake fixed, and about a friend of hers who is a mechanic. And it seems like there's some background there. And she says that Jones lunged at her, grabbed her by the throat, and threatened her not to mention another expletive to him again. Now, I couldn't find the actual document, but it was reported on by the News and Observer and CBS 17. This it's censored as expletive by News and Observer. It's censored as man by CBS 17. So I think we can guess which which word this judge was actually using. Just guessing. I believe the was it the mayor pro tem of Durham got in trouble, or got some people mad at him for saying the phrase or the acronym YN. So apparently maybe the use of that word is controversial in Durham. This is a black man, and my guess is that he was is that the term censored out is the N word. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. So and as a response to the domestic protective order, Jones claimed that the two didn't drive together. They actually drove separate vehicles, and that he left the argument. He physically removed himself, and that it was the alleged victim who followed him to his car, threw his keys across the parking lot, and then started falsely accusing him of assault. Once again, his lawyers say there's a witness that says no assault occurred. So, I mean, when you get into cases like this, generally, when there is police investigating, you would hope they would do some due diligence to investigate, talk to all the witnesses. But sometimes in charges like this, the charges will be based on the testimony, the claims of a single witness. And so then, even if you're innocent, if the witness is convincing enough to the police, then you might go through the whole rigmarole, get your name dragged through the mud, even if you did nothing. Or maybe you did do something, and maybe you deserve to get your name dragged through the mud. But Jones is up for re-election next year, so we'll see how this plays out. We'll according to his lawyers, he's convinced that this will be handled quickly and in his favor. We'll see how it plays out. Once again, guilty. Sorry, not guilty. What is the phrase? I am blanking out on the phrase. Innocent until proven guilty. That is the phrase. That is an excellent phrase, and it is because of situations just like this. It's newsworthy. I report on it, but he is innocent until he is proven guilty. And our next story here is from someone who is guilty because he has pled guilty. This is a resident of Raleigh who has been sentenced to 27 months in federal prison for threatening President Biden. This is an odd one because we don't know why he threatened President Biden. I looked through the court documents. It seemed like a lot of them were sealed. A lot of the court documents were not available to the public. The threats he used weren't available to the public. I looked up his voting record. He's registered as unaffiliated. I couldn't find any indication there what his partisan background was. But this man, the story from the court documents from the Eastern District of North Carolina U.S. Attorney's Office is that he posted several disturbing comments to Twitter, also known as X, on January 10th, including death threats to then President Biden. And according to the charges, he was also threatening Biden's children as well. So the Secret Service they interview him on January 14th, and he threatened to kill the Secret Service agent as well. So he was initially arrested by the Raleigh police for that threat against the Secret Service agent. And then when it became a federal case, that state charge was dropped. So this is Michael James Furr, 31 years old, of Raleigh. So he pled guilty to threatening President Biden and threatening the Secret Service agent, and the charge for threatening Biden's children was dropped. Now you might say, well, he's threatening a Democrat official. Of course, he must be a Republican. This might be right-wing crime. But the threat was made January 10th of this year, between the election and the inauguration. So was he threatening the lame duck president because he was angry with him because of some other reason? Maybe he was threatening him because he felt like he had sabotaged Kamala Harris's chances by when he dropped out, and that whole those whole shenanigans. I don't know. Usually people who threaten members of a certain political party are from the opposite political party and is politically motivated. Sometimes it's not, which is why I wish there was a little more clarity here, a little more openness to the public, because it seems like, looking at the court record, it seems like everything was sealed in the press release. They don't say what the threat was. I didn't see anything that said his username to look up the threats on Twitter. So who knows? But this is frustrating. Stories like this sometimes have national significance when people are making threats to a president, even if it's an outgoing president. And so I think the public really should be able to know what exactly is the threat. Can we infer from the threat what the motivation is? Because it's a big topic. As I cover, there are a lot of threats to the right, especially from Antifa, from the very radical Democrats. If you ask a Democrat, they'll tell you that it's the other way around, that the primary political threat is from people on the right. And so I'm not going to be one to only cover, stories going a particular way. I'm not going to only cover threats, political threats that are motivated by the left. But in this case, we don't know, and we should know so that we can be able to say that for sure, to say, hey, was this just a crazy lunatic and it wasn't politically motivated? Was it politically motivated from the left? Was it politically motivated from the right? I think we should know that. And our next story here is, well, this, unlike some of the assaults against ICE, this assault in Morrisville does not appear to be politically motivated, because the man charged with ramming two ICE vehicles in Morrisville, he was not a left-wing activist. He was an illegal alien. And the ironic thing is that he wasn't even the illegal alien that ICE was looking for that day. They got it wrong. They said, hey, that car looks like the car we're tracking. That driver looks like the illegal alien that we just got a removal for. When they box him in, he tries to ram his way out. They arrest him. Turns out it's a different illegal alien who also has a removal order. What are the odds? Seems like, something odd was going on there. But let's run over some of the details. So according to the charging documents, The ICE officers had obtained a removal order for Maynor Godinez Mendez, and they were staking out Chapel Hill Road in Morrisville on December 2nd near Sangam Mart, a grocery store that they believed he frequented based on, I guess, their surveillance from him or some sort of information they received. They spotted a red Honda Civic, quote, known to be utilized by Mendez, with a driver matching his description. They followed him to this grocery store they believed he would be going to and were able to box in his car when it stopped with 3 federal vehicles. They jumped out and they have their uniforms with police on it. They say, "Stop, police." And so he tries to ram his way out. He hits one vehicle that was occupied. He hits another vehicle that they already jumped out of. Apparently, one officer has to jump out of the way to stop from being run over. He eventually jumps a curb and crashes into another parked car, disabling his vehicle. So he didn't get far, but that is enough to get you charged with what is the language here, with assaulting, resisting, or impeding federal officers. Now, some people have been charged with the more serious version of this, assault with a deadly or dangerous weapon when they use a car. I did not see that language when I looked for it. Maybe I was just missing it, but that is still a serious offense. But it turns out when they arrested this man, they found that it was not Godinez Mendez. It was a man named Milton Ermilo Arriaga Roblero, 23 years old, who they found driving this red Honda Civic. And so there were some pictures, there was some media shared by the anti-ICE activists at Siembra NC. I also found a video on TikTok, with the crashed vehicle and the immigration officers around there. And so, they like, oh, yeah, we see ICE in Morrisville, and apparently they got a guy, but perhaps not the guy they were looking for. And our next immigration story is a man named Jason Martinez, 24 years old, a resident of Nightdale, who is a Honduran. And this Honduran has been charged with 1 count of statutory rape of a child by an adult and 2 counts of statutory rape of a child under the age of 15 for crimes against a 12-year-old female here in Wake County. So the Wake Sheriff's Office received the report of the sexual assault in March. They did a thorough investigation. They got a warrant in July, and they were able to arrest Martinez in Cumberland County on Wednesday. So Martinez also goes by Jason Martinez Mejia, Jason Martinez Rodriguez, and Gacion Rodriguez. Apparently, that's how Jason is spelled in Spanish, perhaps. So Martinez is being held without bail in the Wake County Detention Center. We know that he is not a citizen of the United States because of the document for withholding bail. Says that he is a citizen of Honduras and he has a, quote, history of violent charges in New Jersey. So I did not see an ICE detainer filed. This is, something that is often filed when foreigners, usually it's illegal aliens, when they're charged with some sort of crime. ICE will file this detainer and say, hey, when you're going to let him go, let us pick him up instead. They can also file it if it's not an illegal alien, if it's merely an immigrant being charged with some serious crime. ICE can still file that, but they have not filed that in this case. So this is Jason Martinez, currently held in the Wake County Detention Center. And our final story for the week is quite an interesting one, which I believe merits more investigation. I don't know if I'll be able to do more investigating myself. I don't know if I have any leads to pull, but CBS 17 appears to be the only local outlet which has done any digging into this story. Not the only one to repeat the police's narrative, but the only one to actually talk to the witnesses and actually get the real scoop of what is going here. Because a man has been charged with the state equivalent of hate crime charges. So this is called ethnic intimidation, saying that he assaulted 2 men because of their race, color, nationality, or country of origin. And based on the names, they're Hispanic. So he assaulted 2 Hispanics because of their race, color, nationality, or country of origin. That's what the police say. That's what he has been charged with. He's been charged with 2 counts of second-degree kidnapping, 2 counts of assault by pointing a gun, 2 counts of communicating threats, 2 counts of ethnic intimidation, 1 count of assault inflicting serious injury, 1 count of assault and battery, 1 count of going armed to the terror of the people. Now, this is a whole a whole set of charges for Austin Thomas Herber, 27 years old. So wow, sounds bad, right? Well, CBS 17 went and talked to witnesses. They talked to the owner of the restaurant. What is the name of this restaurant? Smash Masters in Zebulon. They talked to one of the owners. They talked to the passenger in Herber's vehicle because this was related to a vehicle crash, and they got surveillance video as well. And so what the surveillance video shows is Herber is leaving the parking lot in his truck. He has 2 passengers, and a black car speeds, drives out of control, reckless, drives across the grass. You can see sparks flying up as they're driving places they're not supposed to be driving, and bam, right into Herber's truck. And apparently this seriously injured at least one of his passengers because she described waking up after the accident, finding herself covered in blood, and seeing Herber outside of the vehicle. Because the 3 occupants of the vehicle that just crashed into them, they weren't too keen on sticking around. And so the surveillance video shows the driver. He gets out of there. His name is Juan Campos. He's been cited for failing to remain at the scene of an accident and failing to reduce speed to avoid a crash, according to the Zebulon police. But the 2 alleged victims of this hate crime, of this ethnic intimidation, are the 2 passengers who also wanted to leave. And apparently Herber wasn't going to let them leave the scene of an accident. So one of the owners of this restaurant, Jessica Thompson, she says when she got there, Herber was already out of the car and the 2 men were on the ground. So she says Herber asked where they came from, and that when they were attempting to leave the scene, he put his hand on their shoulder and said, "Get back on the ground." But she said she did not see a gun, which is one of the, some of the more serious charges there involve him having a gun. They're saying that he had a handgun, an H&K CC9 9mm. So apparently they know the specific gun that they're saying he used, perhaps as one they found on him. And the Zebulon police don't seem to have been very communicative. CBS 17 says they didn't clarify the charges, so I guess it's not clear, what information the Zebulon police were going off of when they charged him with this. Was it the testimony of the 2 men on the ground who had been vehicles, who were apparently attempting to commit a crime by leaving the scene of an accident? That is a crime for the passengers as well. Okay, it's not as serious of a crime as it is for the driver. For the driver, I believe it is a felony. For the passengers, when I was looking it up, it appeared to only be a class 1 misdemeanor for the passengers to leave the scene of an accident which caused injury. So in this case, this lady, one of the passengers, needed stitches, was knocked out for some period of time. Seems injurious to me, but not quite rising to the level of serious bodily injury. Okay, it's a more serious crime to leave the scene of an accident if that accident caused death, if that accident caused serious bodily injury, and that's basically permanent harm. That's the sort of a bit of a definition for serious bodily injury, is that if you're permanently maimed, permanently maybe even disfigured, have permanent pain, and that's serious bodily injury. If it's only injury, it's still a crime, but not quite as serious. So if he was holding them there because they were trying to leave, trying to commit a crime, was he justified under the law? Well, I am not a lawyer, but I can read the law just like any of you can. And you can read North Carolina General Statute 15A-404, which does allow some limited form of maybe not citizen's arrest. It's called detention. Okay, so a citizen can detain someone under certain circumstances. It's very, very, very limited. And if you're ever planning on doing this, you should make sure you know the law to ensure you aren't stepping outside of the bounds. So one of the qualifications is that they have probable cause to believe the detainee has committed a crime in their presence. quote, involving physical injury to another person. So, leaving the scene of an accident, is that a crime involving physical injury if the accident caused physical injury? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure. When I looked it up, it didn't seem like there is um, perhaps not too many cases that have been prosecuted under this law. I believe what I was seeing was that it was a pass about 20 years ago. And so, and the one of the other qualifications of the detention is, quote, in a reasonable manner considering the offense involved and the circumstances of the detention. So reasonable, a little vague, sometimes has been clarified by case law when they use language like reasonable. But is it reasonable to use a handgun to detain two men trying to commit the crime of fleeing the scene of an accident? Is that reasonable? Is it reasonable to grab their shoulder and tell them to get on the ground? I don't know. But what is not reasonable is for the police to make it out. If you just heard about the charges, if you just heard kidnapping, assault by gun, communicating threats, ethnic intimidation, you might think, wow, this is a very horrible person. This is a hate crime. I believe that hate crime isn't in the North Carolina statutes, but this is how it is characterized, a hate crime. But it seems like the circumstances are much more complicated. I don't see how it would be ethnically motivated for them to run into his truck in the first place. Was it ethnically motivated when these three Hispanics crashed into him? He is a white man. I believe the victim who was interviewed by CBS 17, the unquestionable victim who was injured in this crash, a white woman. Was that was that an ethnic crime? An ethnically motivated crime? Was it ethnically motivated for him to hold them until the police got there? I don't know. Just seems off to me. So we'll see. We'll see how this case progresses. If he's able to fight the charge, if he's able to present evidence, and perhaps we'll see what evidence the state has to say that this was motivated by some race, color, nationality, country of origin, or if it was motivated by him not wanting these people to commit a crime by leaving the scene of a crash. We'll see. And that is all of the stories for this week. So if you've been tuned in, thank you for joining us. You can find these stories in email form or in text form and article form at triangletrumpet.news. I send it out as a newsletter every week, and I'm trying to do a broadcast every week as well for people who prefer to get their news in the audio form. So head over to triangletrumpet.news. You can find links to all my sources. You can subscribe there, do all that good stuff. Thank you.